everyone. My name is Rochelle Lee. I'm president of I'm Blau & Associates. We're a leadership development and coaching company. And I'm recording this as an introduction to a video presentation that we did around leadership presence. From time to time, we host an event where peers get together and as leaders and discuss topics that they're dealing with. And so we've recorded a presentation that we did for one of those events, and talking about leadership presence and the key elements and why it's important to inspire others towards the greater vision and helping them see and feel good about the work that they're doing that's contributing to that, so that they have a great experience together as a team. So hopefully you'll get some good tidbits out of this video, and thank you for watching. This is one of our discussion series. We started these during COVID as a way to still help people be connected in such a dark time, and they were very popular. And so as hot topics come up, and we know from our coaching and our training with leadership teams, what they're struggling with at the time, and then we'll put on a discussion series to address these. And I'm really excited because we have our guest speaker, Michael Piperno from Comvia Group in the US. And Michael and I had a chance to meet each other probably just after COVID, I think, on a similar type of format with a company, an assessment company that both his company and we are partners of. And in that session, Michael asked a question, and we were all chatting together. And I thought to myself, this is a person who seems to share similar values around leadership and around why we do it, and that work experiences are life experiences too. And it's really helpful if we can find ways to make it great for everyone, including us as leaders, so that people can sleep at night and have a really great life. So we connected all that time ago and have stayed connected. And so I'm really excited to have this topic of leadership presence today with you. So just a little bit about Michael. He's a leadership communicator, trainer, and coach. He's a lifelong educator. He's a former actor, although I don't know about former, because he does improv workshops for leaders. So I think he's still an actor. And he likes to help leaders show up and be their best selves. And that's something that's very near and dear to our heart too in our company. And our values are very similar: open communication, inclusivity, honesty. And the people that we work with, and the people who are here in this room, I know those things are important to you too, which is why peer sharing is such a valuable experience for all of us. And it's something we don't usually get a lot of opportunity to do. So, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to say a few more words about yourself. And I think you have a question for our audience too.
Sure, absolutely. So thanks so much for that introduction, Rochelle, and it's great to see all of you. Thanks for joining us today. Rochelle pretty much covered it, but I'll just add that I've been teaching people to be better speakers and presenters and leaders for almost 30 years now. I've done it ever since I graduated from university here in the United States and was a teacher, and I've been a teacher in formal settings, also adjunct professor at universities, and then also I've helped people communicate their brands as a marketing agency leader. So I'm all about communication, and I'm all about making sure that we're delivering the message well and showing up the way that we need to as leaders. And that's a lot about what we're going to talk about today. The question that Rochelle teased there a little bit is, I'd like to hear from you, and you can tell us by unmuting, or I guess they could do the chat too, Rochelle, and tell us what good leadership or executive presence looks like to you. Think of maybe a leader that you admire or someone who's had an impact on you. What are the traits and qualities that gave them executive or leadership presence?
I feel like they instill confidence in me when I hear them communicating.
Yeah, absolutely, instilling confidence. Okay, yeah, honesty and authenticity, I believe I heard there.
Yes.
Sometimes what comes along with that is transparency as well.
We have technical knowledge and high EQ, understands the team they lead, builds trust in themselves and others within the organization. Excellent points. Great. Okay, Michael, I'll let you continue.
Great. So yeah, so it's all those things that so you know a lot about this already, but we all show up in different ways. And in order to really have your brand of leadership presence, you need to find your comfortable way to show up for yourself and your career and your leadership and your team or your company, whatever you're leading. And then also how you show up for the people you lead, because you know them, you know what they need. So we can use many words to define what leadership presence is, and it could be body language and right down to having eye contact. If you're not someone who is comfortable making eye contact, then you have to find another way to make someone feel engaged. It can be your tone of voice. It can be your showing conviction in what you believe in and the things that matter. We heard confidence, we heard being authentic, we heard being honest. So all of these words are very important. And I think we even had EQ in there in the chat as well. So emotional intelligence and emotional regulation when things get tough, like all of these words, all of these traits make up your brand of leadership presence. And there's not one right way to do it, but you have to do the work to find what's comfortable for you, because leaders who have strong leadership and executive presence are the ones that inspire people. They're the ones that and when leaders find a way to take what they value, what they hold dear, and be able to express those values and also make the people that they lead feel heard and part of that journey, and that vision of where we're going, that is what gives you that presence. There's a lot of leaders out there that are famous leaders who, to be honest with you, I don't think have great presence. And I don't know if you'd agree with me.
Does one come to mind?
Should I name names?
Well, you're
I've
in the
had them as
US, so maybe
bosses in the
not.
past. I'm not going to name names, but I've had them as bosses in the past, and it's been it's a shame, because a lot of leaders. So listen, people get into a leadership position often because they've risen through the ranks, and a lot of times, I know you've seen this too, Rochelle, is you get a leadership title because of your skills and what you're able to do and the results that you bring. But sometimes you've never really led or managed people at that level. And you've never had the opportunity to work on what your leadership brand is and how your core values connect to the organization and to the vision that you're on, and all of that. And all of that stuff really matters. So in my younger days, I had bosses who were not, I wouldn't call them leaders. They were managers. They were command and control managers. And that wasn't great a long time ago, but now in the workforce now, it's even more important that leaders find their authentic leadership self and then learn how to show up in a way that's going to help them and their leadership brand and the people that they lead.
So would you say, I know there's not one right way to do it, but it's almost, there is one right way, which is your way with your values, and really understanding what that is and how that makes a difference. And if it's not about you and it's about others as well, then that, goes better. And I guess the question I have for you is, why in this environment do leaders need to be inspirational and influential? What difference does it make?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind to answer that question about what difference it makes, Rochelle, is that people don't stay with companies for 30 years anymore. And I think 10 years ago it was 5 years. It's maybe even less now. So it's harder to keep good talent, top talent, engaged and aligned with the mission of the organization. And the leaders who aren't doing the work to try to inspire and motivate their people are at a much higher risk of losing the people that matter most. So I think that's one of the reasons it matters. Second, it also makes you as a leader more aligned with your own personal purpose and your purpose of the mission. And when people can see when you're exhibiting behaviors that show that you care, then they are more likely to be motivated to care.
And so I guess when it comes to practical attributes, we know that people do good work for those that they like and they trust, and that even if the personality isn't an exact match, but they really believe that the person has their best interest in mind. What are some of the things that helps people build that trust with you when it comes to how you present yourself as a leader? What kinds of things help people feel compelled to join forces with you for the long term?
So yeah, I'll give you, I think the biggest superpower there that is underutilized in our lives probably is listening, and active listening, making people feel that they matter by listening to them, hearing them out fully, not interrupting, making people feel that they can be curious and question, and that you're hearing from them matters, creates an environment where people are more likely to innovate, to take the risks that are required to move things forward. If people don't feel that you have their back, or that they're aligned with you, or that you value them and you want them to be heard, guess what they won't do? They won't speak up, and they won't innovate, and they won't collaborate. Things become siloed. So it's critically important that flex that muscle of not only being a good physical listener, actually staying in the moment and fully listening, but also being that facilitator that helps solicit more. I know, you have your wonderful coaching course, and it teaches a lot of those skills to help your people figure things out for themselves, but it's a lot of listening, it's a lot of questioning. And that is all part of making people feel heard and empowered, and that they matter.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we know people struggle, and I've experienced this too, is delivering the tough stuff. Things aren't going well. I get concerned that people are going to be worried about the future and maybe not want to put their all in, or maybe thinking about other alternatives. But what I've experienced and witnessed is when leaders with good presence and that authenticity and integrity, it's in delivering the tough stuff that you actually can build a lot more of those bonds, because you're willing to step into it. Can you speak to those moments?
Yeah, and I think what you're touching on is something I like to talk about as the currency of really investing in yourself as a leader and in your presence, because what that naturally does is creates more trust, creates more psychological safety on the team and at the organization. And when you have to have those difficult conversations, whether it's delivering difficult news, or talking about a restructuring, or something that is not necessarily going to be a great thing for the audience, the stakeholder that you're talking to, when that trust equity is there, when you funded that leadership presence and relationship bank, you're more likely to have a better interaction in those moments when you need to have those difficult conversations. It's also the way you do it in the moment. It's how you show up, again, with presence. How many of you, you can just raise your hand. How many of you have walked into the room and known that things weren't good in that room? You can tell by the facial expression, by the tone, by the posture, by everything. That's presence. So when you walk into a room as a leader and you're going to have a difficult conversation, you have to set the tone for what the room needs to be like for that conversation, because other people will mirror you and follow you.
There was a great monster.ca ad a long time ago, and I've just thought of that when you were speaking. So there's a group of staff talking, and the leader comes in the room. I don't know if anyone remembers seeing this, and everyone stops talking, and he kind of just puts his head down and walks by, sort of frustrated that either they're talking about, or he's just not part of that group. So he walks by, and then he stops and thinks for a second and turns around and goes and joins the group, and then shares something with them and sort of commands the presence. And then they all start laughing, and they're one team. And that's always stuck with me, how sometimes it's easier just in the day-to-day just to kind of walk on by, but through your presence and through how you sort of give in that moment, you can make such great connection.
You can. And the big ugly vulnerability word comes in with that too, Rochelle. I mean, vulnerability is a part of leadership. And we're not saying that you want to lay all of your vulnerableness on the table every single day, but even I know when we teach coaching and you talk about disclosing something during the conversation that's going to help the person to move that self-disclosure skill, like that's being vulnerable. That's sharing that you've experienced something similar that you can understand. You don't want to, of course, make it all about you in those moments, but people respond to that. People respond to a shared experience. They respond to the fact that they know, because you are willing to share and be a little bit vulnerable, that you have a commonality or that you understand. That's where the big empathy comes in as well. Because empathy is not sympathy. It's not like, oh, I feel badly. Empathy is being able to put yourself in that person's space and try to experience their view. And when you have a shared experience like that and you're willing to share, it just brings that empathy level up really high, which then helps with trust.
Mm-hmm. And what about storytelling? Because when people tell stories as they're engaging with people, even if it's just in the moment, one-on-one, as they're passing and interacting, or in a bigger presentation, storytelling seems to be really powerful. I think it's a developmental skill, which I hope. Tell us about storytelling and the impact that makes.
Yeah, and I teach storytelling a lot when I do presentation coaching and training because it's often an element that presenters forget. So to answer your question directly, what storytelling does, when you instead of throw data at someone or just give them the information and you put it into a story, it's more relatable. Stories are often more memorable. We're wired to remember stories. And you think about that. Think about things that you remember for decades. They're usually stories. They're not a fact or figure that someone just threw out at you. So when, as a leader, and also especially when you're doing presentations, I always recommend to bring in storytelling as much as possible. Sometimes the whole presentation can be a story, but sometimes you're just using it to grab attention in the beginning and relate to the audience. And the other thing about storytelling that's a brilliant tool for every leader is that it reminds you to think about your audience. What's the story they're going to need to hear? And how can I deliver it and match where they are? Because that's another thing I see a lot in most of the people that I coach are senior level leaders, and they're brilliant and they're smart, but they're not thinking about the audience on the other end of their communication. They're thinking about themselves and the communication they need to get out, but not the peoples and the brains that have to absorb it and who they want to inspire or take action. And when
I just
you
want to
reverse
jump
that,
in here.
yeah.
Because I know leadership presence is also about asking question, and we actually have one in the group. So Arzina, if you want to unmute yourself, she has a question about this portion of the presentation.
Great.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I was trying to find the raise hand function, but I could not. The moment has kind of passed, but I was really reflecting on what you said about active listening. And I think when we, maybe 10 years ago, the focus on leaders and a desired trait was multitasking. And it was all about how well can you multitask. And I feel like that's so detrimental to leaders because you can't actually deeply focus on one thing and do that kind of development work. And so, but as leaders, we also need to be able to do many things like simultaneously. So my question was, how do we balance, the skills required for a job, such as multitasking, which actually is detrimental to something like fostering active listening skills?
Arzina, it's a really important point. And I'll first start by saying addressing multitasking is I firmly believe that it actually doesn't really exist. You can't do two things well at the same time. But our workforce and our jobs require very often adaptability, flexibility, time management, all of those different skills. And also now we're talking about leading on top of that. And it's very hard. What we ask a lot of leaders to do these days is to do the technical aspects of their job as well as lead people. And that's a problem in society, is that I believe that a lot of leaders aren't given the time in their responsibility allotment for the week, enough time to really focus on leading and focus on their people and focus on empowering. So what I'll say to you about balancing that is, it's if you have to be adaptable in the moment, you have to be flexible in the moment, try your best to be intentional in what you're doing in the moment. And remember that, especially when you're trying to inspire someone and motivate someone, you have to spend the time to hear them out. You have to. It's a non-negotiable. So it's finding I don't have the answer to solve that, but what I do know is you have to give people your full attention. Think about the value of attention, especially since 2007, when the smartphone market went crazy with the iPhone. Think about how distracted we are. Attention spans are much shorter they are now than they ever were. And one of the biggest gifts you can give people who you lead is your full attention in a world that doesn't give it to them. It doesn't have to be for 3 long days you're giving your full attention, but in that conversation over Zoom, or if you're in person in the hallway, or the one-on-one you have with your person, give them your attention. Put your smartphone away. Make sure your computer's not dinging. Show them that they matter. And going back to what Melanie said, be curious. Ask questions, because that is part of leadership. Think about your own behavior. Have you ever said something to someone or asked a question and said to yourself, boy, that wasn't clear, or I could have asked that better? Happens to everybody. And a good leader or a good listener will help that person ask a better question, be more clear.
Michael, before we'll have just a few minutes to, if anybody has any questions, and then we'll also have some time after the peer discussion time. But before we go to that, just quickly, one last thing is, we know we can all think about people who have charisma and they're extroverted. Does that make them more easily have leadership presence? Or talk about the difference between introversion and extroversion and what difference it makes.
Absolutely. And I don't believe that extroversion correlates with presence. I think that that's a lot of what we see out there as glorified as leadership, is the people who are so charismatic, who are very social in a room. Yeah, that's that person's brand, but there, like we've said before, there are often leaders out there who exhibit those types of traits and behaviors who actually aren't good leaders for their people. So you can be introverted, you can be extroverted, you can be in between, and figure out your brand of presence. Figure out how you are comfortable showing up for people. How I have coached many amazing quiet leaders, people who are not the person who's going to be social around the room all the time, but their people love working for them and working with them, because they're flexing their strengths out of this pool of skills that you can use to bolt together, to put together your version of presence that's going to feel good for you and resonate with your people.
Thank you.